This is the Church of St. Paul in the Desert.
In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. So today is the first Sunday of Lent, and we ratchet up the run-up now to the great vigil of Easter and the Easter season with a vengeance, and it always begins, as per tradition, with that on that first Sunday with the story of creation. And I think the theme always in every beginning of Lent is the fact that we are tempted and we fall to temptation and what God's remedy of that is. So in Genesis we have the classic story, the so-called fall of creation, or if you prefer, the origination of original sin. This story you just heard, Adam and Eve and the apple and all that stuff, is kind of a mythological narrative of explaining why things are the way they are. Mythological, by the way, does not mean it's not true. It means it's profoundly true. And it's a story way of telling why the world, for all of the good things that happen, why the world is a mess. And why it is that there's death and suffering and cruelty and viciousness and dictators and all those kinds of things. Something went wrong after the creation. The world you and I see, and you don't need to go very far to see the evidence if you ever took a history course or looked at the friends you have in your life and the struggles they've gone through. If you've watched the evening news, you know the fall took place. One theologian has wittily said, the one Christian doctrine that can be empirically or scientifically verified is the doctrine of original sin. Just watch the news. What happened? And this story is trying to explain it because it's not the way God intended the world to be. The garden is a symbol of unity and harmony, and all is well. All needs are met. Humans have a purpose in life, and something went wrong. And so it's captured in the story of the fact that the serpent tempts the woman and the woman tempts the man, and they eat the fruit from the tree they're not supposed to eat. By the way, there's nothing in here that implies that men or women are not equally guilty here. There's no place for chauvinism here. They all blew it. And I think the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, as it's explained here, is that, only God gets to know that. We humans are not entitled to be like God and to know ultimately forever good and evil. We can approximate it, but we are creatures. We are not the creator. And maybe the deeper level of this disobedience, because it is an act of disobedience, is that the creature was not willing to be a creature. We wanted to be a creator, and we just couldn't accept it. It's the old thing about if Grandma said, don't put your hands in the cookie jar, guess where I'm going? Right to the cookie jar. Somebody said I couldn't do it. And so in a sense, humankind, you might say in colloquial language, we got too big for our britches, and now we see the results. We cannot, because we're creatures, we cannot save ourselves. The next scientific breakthrough, the next medical miracle, the next technological wonder will not save us. Might make life a little more pleasant, and note all those things come with side effects sometimes that aren't so great, but none of those things will save us. We're going to need help. And as the plumber said, who on vacation for the first time ever looked upon Niagara Falls and all that water roiling over the cliff, he said, I think I can fix this. Obviously, he can't, nor can we. And so we have in the second reading St. Paul's rather complex and complicated theological argument about how the solution comes about. And he makes a comparison between the first Adam in our Genesis story and the new Adam. I think we know that Adam and Eve are not personal names. Adam is Hebrew for mankind or humankind or every man or every woman. It's about humanity. In other words, it's about all of us. It's not just some little couple running around in the garden with fig leaves, which Hollywood would have a lot of fun with, but that's not what's actually going on. We're talking about all of humanity. And Paul is basically saying, in all that twisted theological argument, that as the disaster took place by way of human agency, so indeed it is through human agency another time around that will bring about the solution to this problem with a new Adam, which of course is Jesus. And so Jesus now, without the limitations of that first Adam, wanders into the wilderness and encounters the powers of evil. And the first thing the devil says is, "You're the Son of God, you're hungry, obviously, you're starving. Make those stones turn into bread, you can do it." And Jesus says, "Thou shalt not live by bread alone, but by every word out of the mouth of God." I think the children's version of that would be, you cannot live by bread alone, you also need peanut butter and jelly. And Jesus says, "No, I'm not going to do that." That bread, bread, ironically, in our language doesn't mean just money. It means food, it means money, it means wealth. You got some bread. It's a symbol, I think, of the things that make us feel secure. It's about security. And how often we are tempted to give up our rights or privileges or opportunities for the sake of security. You've heard the term national security. Many sins have been committed in that name, and people have been deprived of things they had the right to do because someone was obsessed about security. There is no security in this world. It just doesn't exist. We can approximate it. There's no pure security. We sell out so often. Then the devil says, "Okay, that didn't work. I tell you what, Jesus, why don't you climb up to the top of that temple parapet there and just jump off? You want to wow people and make them believe you? Just jump off the temple. That'll do it. They'll believe you now. They'll think you're the Messiah." And Jesus says, "No, thou shalt not tempt the Lord God." How often we are tempted to look better than we really are, to be at the head table, to be the best thing in the room, to be famous or to have a good reputation or to be liked or to be praised. And what we're willing to do sometimes to look that way. And we fall and fail many times. It's kind of like the old pastor who was on his deathbed and he was reaching the end of his journey, and some of his close friends had come by to visit at the house, and they with his wife gathered around the bed, and they were telling him what they appreciated about him and what a great pastor he had been, what a great friend he'd been and colleague, how much they appreciated his teaching and his ministry in his parish and as a neighbor, and he was a great father and husband. And his wife notices he's not looking very happy with all these compliments, and he's sort of frowning. And as the friends all file out and leave, she turns to him and says, "Did you hear all the great things they were saying about you, dear?" And he said, "Yeah." "Well, why are you seem to be upset? What's upsetting you? You seem to be distressed." He said, "Yeah, I'm distressed." "Well, what's bothering you?" "My modesty. They didn't mention my modesty." We want people to think we can jump off pinnacles and look good and be impressive. Common sin. Well, that didn't work either, so the devil says, "Okay, I'm going to roll the dice. You see all the kingdoms of the earth? Kingdoms, armies, governments, parliaments, gold deposits, infrastructures, palaces. Lordy, the whole 9 yards, it's yours. If you would like to have all of that and be in charge of the whole tamale, all I ask is that you worship me a little bit." And Jesus says, "No. Thou shalt not make anything that is not God, God. Only God is entitled to that kind of adoration. Get lost, Satan." And how often we are tempted as humans to cozy up to power and to authority because it makes us look good or makes us feel better, or we have better status, or we have more power, or we get to move things around because we're cozy with the powers that be, and sell out. It comes to mind things like civic religion, where all too often Christians in many times and places have cozied up too much to secular power and sold their soul for security or status or protection. I think of the 1930s in Germany, when the nationalist socialist movement was moving rapidly through Germany, and most of the churches in Germany sold out. The German Catholic Church, the German Christian Church, most of them cozied up, hoping, of course, that all will be well. He doesn't really mean it. And you can even find documentary films, by the way, where you see Nazi flags flapping in the sanctuary, cozying up to power in order to feel safe and good. There were a few exceptions. The Diocese of Linz, for example, in Austria, had a bishop who spoke out against Hitler. Some sense that this Nazi movement wasn't going to pass the smell test. They were a minority, but they spoke up. And in that diocese was a young man named Franz Jägerstätter. And by the way, the film is just now coming out. The name of the film is A Hidden Life. And it's about Franz Jägerstätter, a young German Austrian farmer, a wife and 2 daughters. And he was not a particularly educated man, but he was very conscientious and thoughtful. He read the paper, paid attention, went to church regularly, listened, and he thought the Nazi thing didn't pass the smell test. He had seen his Jewish neighbors carted off and disappear. He knew something was wrong, and sure enough, in 1938, when Austria was annexed by the Nazis, it was just a matter of time before he got the summons to report for the draft. And Franz, after much agony and sharing and praying, especially with his wife, he reported for duty and announced that he would not serve in the German army. He would not serve. Of course, he was arrested and put in jail. And it's an amazing story. There's a whole book on this, by the way, that's now available, and now it's in a movie. And eventually, of course, he was executed by beheading. He's what you might call a modern martyr. We know about Bonhoeffer, but I'm not sure this gentleman was all that well known, although in the Roman Catholic Church now he is being advanced toward official sainthood in the Catholic system. You know, it's interesting that while he was in jail, it was proffered that, well, all right, maybe, how about you serve in the medical corps? The devil is very subtle in its temptations. How cozy. Well, okay, I'll just serve in the medical corps then. And Franz said, no. It's a nice little temptation, but no. That's still enabling something that is not right. And so today we have a new martyr and saint as we become more aware of him. So in the face of all of that comes Jesus into the wilderness, not like the old Adam with all those limitations, but the new Adam. And in the words of the 3rd verse of our closing hymn, we celebrate today that Jesus was the victor in the wilderness. And that's important because you and I also travel through the wilderness. There's no howling wilderness like the fact that someone you really love very much for a long time is suddenly not there. That's a wilderness. There is no barren landscape like knowing someone you care about cannot free themselves from the slavery of addiction or opioids or bad behavior despite all efforts to the contrary. There is no empty terrain like knowing the doctors have pulled out all the tools in their medical toolbox and there's nothing left to do. There is no barren wilderness like someone you care about drifting into the faint horizon of Alzheimer's, or that lost job where you're no longer wanted and needed by your company and suddenly you don't know why you're here or what you're doing and the money isn't going to be very good in 3 months and what are we going to do? We all travel through some kind of wilderness, then, now, or in the future, including the wilderness of yielding to temptation. We do. We're the old Adam. And sometimes it's a howling wilderness just to think of the things I wish I could call back, I wish I could do over, and I just can't. The ultimate wilderness is death. And by the way, that's where Jesus is headed. That's the ultimate wilderness because it includes all those other howling terrains of barren landscape. And what that means for us is that there's no place where you and I can go. No form of wilderness or disaster. There's no place where we can go where God hasn't been already. He's been there. And so what we should know on this first Sunday of Lent, as we look at the honest truth about ourselves and the human species and all the ways that we blow it personally and nationally and internationally, is to remember, I think this. No matter how bad the wilderness looks for you or anyone you care about, it never means that God has abandoned you, that you're not loved, that you're not valuable, that you're not important, and you are not alone. It may seem like you're alone, but you're not. Jesus, the new Adam, has been there. And so even though we fail in our ability sometimes to say no to the temptations that we face, the whole point is that Jesus, the new Adam, said no for us. Therefore, he's the victor, and we are victors with him. Amen.